The fire began like so many others, a frantic call in the dead of night, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the station's quiet hum with the kind of urgency that raised every man and woman to their feet in seconds. Ethan pulled on his gear with the speed of muscle memory, the weight of his oxygen tank pressing against his shoulders as adrenaline surged through his veins. He caught Marco's eye across the truck bay. They exchanged a sharp nod, the kind that meant we've got this. They always did. The drive was short, sirens screaming against the dark. As the truck roared through empty streets, Ethan's fingers tightened around the strap of his helmet. He could already see the plume of smoke stretching into the sky, a grim signal above the warehouses on the edge of the city. Second floor collapse reported, the captain shouted over the roar of the engine. Ethan glanced at Marco, and Marco gave that half grin he always wore, a grin that said danger didn't scare him, not when people were inside. Ethan tried to mirror the grin, but his stomach twisted anyway. When they arrived, chaos was waiting. Flames clawed at the warehouse windows, painting the night with orange fury. Civilians had already been cleared, but there were workers unaccounted for, men trapped somewhere deep in the building. Ethan's boots hit the pavement, heat radiating so fiercely it felt like stepping into an oven. Orders came quickly, but to Ethan, they blurred into instinct. Mask on, hose ready, go. He followed Marco inside, the air instantly choking, filled with smoke so thick it felt like trying to breathe through wet cement. The sound was deafening. Wood snapped, metal groaned, fire roared like a beast too hungry to ever be satisfied. Ethan gripped the nozzle of the hose, spraying arcs of water into the inferno as they advanced. Marco moved ahead, his silhouette sharp against the glow. Together, they searched, calling out for survivors, their voices swallowed by the heat and noise. The beam of Ethan's flashlight swept across twisted machinery, scorched walls, and finally, two men huddled against a column, coughing violently. Relief shot through Ethan's chest. Over here, Marco's voice carried above the chaos. The two firefighters moved fast, hauling the workers to their feet, guiding them toward the exit. Every second felt like a countdown. Ethan's lungs burned, even through the mask, and the air regulator hissed, a chilling reminder of limited oxygen. Just as they reached the doorway, the ceiling gave a shuddering groan. Ethan glanced upward. A crack zigzagged across the beams, glowing embers raining down like angry sparks. Go. Get them out, Marco barked. Ethan didn't argue. There wasn't time. He shoved the two men into the arms of waiting firefighters outside, then turned back to see Marco at the threshold, motioning him to hurry. Ethan dashed back, every instinct screaming danger. He was 3 steps away when the roof buckled with a sound like thunder. It happened in a blur. Marco shoved Ethan with all his strength, sending him sprawling through the doorway as flaming debris crashed down behind them. Ethan hit the pavement hard, his helmet skidding to the side. The world spun, and his ears rang with the explosion of collapsing timber. He rolled onto his elbows, eyes wide, searching for Marco. But all he saw was fire. Fire swallowing the doorway, fire devouring the path back inside. No, Ethan's voice cracked, muffled by the mask. He lurched forward, but strong arms grabbed him, dragging him back. He fought them, cursing, pleading, until the weight of 2 teammates pinned him down. It's too late, someone shouted, but Ethan couldn't hear, couldn't accept it. His chest heaved, his heart pounding like a hammer trying to break free. He kept staring at the flames, waiting for Marco to emerge, grinning like always, unshakable. But the doorway stayed silent, filled only with the merciless glow of the inferno. When the fire was finally subdued hours later, dawn was already creeping across the sky, pale and cold. Ethan sat on the curb, mask hanging loose, soot streaking his face. His hands trembled uncontrollably, though the night's chill had nothing to do with it. Around him, fellow firefighters spoke in hushed tones, their eyes avoiding his. The chief clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, saying words Ethan couldn't process, something about bravery, about saving lives. But Ethan couldn't look away from the warehouse's blackened skeleton, smoke still curling skyward. The city would call him a hero. Reporters would snap photos of the firefighter who led 2 men out alive. But Ethan knew the truth. Marco had been the one who made sure Ethan saw another sunrise. Marco had made the choice in an instant, the kind of choice that couldn't be repaid, only carried. And as the first rays of morning lit the wreckage, Ethan felt not triumph, but a hollow, crushing guilt settled deep inside his chest. It would not let him go. The days after the fire bled into each other, gray and heavy, like smoke that refused to clear. Ethan went through the motions, eating without tasting, lying down without sleeping, speaking only when duty forced him to. The world around him moved on, but inside he was stuck, replaying the warehouse over and over, trapped in the exact second when Marco pushed him through that collapsing doorway. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the grin Marco had flashed before the building swallowed him. It was the grin of a man who had made peace with his choice. Ethan hadn't. The city didn't understand. Reporters camped outside the station, eager to catch a glimpse of the hero firefighter. Headlines printed his name in bold, praising his courage, telling a story Ethan didn't recognize as his own. Every medal, every handshake from officials, every clap on the back from strangers burned like an accusation. He wasn't the one who had sacrificed. He wasn't the one who had carried the weight of others out of the fire. He was the one who had been carried, thrown to safety at the cost of someone else's life. At night, the silence was worse. Ethan would lie in his apartment staring at the ceiling, the room cloaked in shadows, and hear Marco's voice in the static of his memory. Sometimes it was Marco's laugh, that low, easy sound that had always cut through tension. Other times it was the bark of an order, "Move it, Ethan. Don't think, act." But more often than not, it was the echo of his last shout, the one that had hurled Ethan out of death's grip. Guilt tightened around his chest until it felt hard to breathe, harder than even inside that burning warehouse. He stopped visiting the firehouse except when scheduled, lingering at the edges of conversations. His teammates respected the space he carved out around himself, but their glances told him everything: pity, concern, and maybe even a little blame. They had all lost Marco, but Ethan alone had been saved. That distinction gnawed at him, poisoned every moment. One night, unable to stand the stillness of his apartment, Ethan walked the city streets. Neon lights flickered over puddles, taxis honked in the distance, and laughter from crowded bars spilled into the air. Life went on, indifferent to his private collapse. He caught his reflection in a shop window, soot-darkened jacket, hollow eyes, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man unraveling. For the first time, he thought seriously about quitting. The firehouse was a place of camaraderie, but he felt like an intruder there now. Every alarm bell that rang was a reminder of the friend who wasn't answering it. Maybe he could disappear, find some quiet job, leave the city, erase the version of himself that people praised but he couldn't live up to. He almost convinced himself it was the only way forward. Then, just as he was on the edge of abandoning everything, a knock came at his apartment door. He opened it to find Elena, Marco's widow, standing in the hallway. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled into a simple knot, and her face bore the pale strain of grief, but her eyes were clear and steady. Ethan froze, guilt crashing harder than ever. He didn't know what to say to her. Apologies felt too small, explanations too hollow. "Elena," his voice cracked, and he stopped, words failing him. She studied him for a moment, then held out a small, wrapped box. It was plain, the kind of wrapping Marco would have chosen in a rush, careless but heartfelt. Her hands trembled just slightly as she pressed it into his. "He wanted you to have this," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but beneath it Ethan heard the quiet ache. "He told me, before every shift, that if anything happened, you'd understand. That you'd know what it meant." Ethan stared at the box, his throat thick. "I don't deserve," he couldn't finish. "You don't get to decide that," Elena interrupted gently, but firmly. Her gaze never wavered. "Marco did. He trusted you. He made his choice, Ethan. Don't dishonor it by carrying only the guilt." Her words hit harder than any flame or falling beam ever could. He wanted to protest, to argue, but the conviction in her eyes stopped him cold. Carefully, as though the box might shatter, Ethan unwrapped it right there in the doorway. Inside lay Marco's lighter, scratched, scarred, its once bright silver dulled by years of use. On the side was an engraving Ethan had never seen up close, "For when the dark feels endless, light it." The weight of it in his palm was astonishing, as if all of Marco's stubbornness, courage, and loyalty had been condensed into that small object. Ethan's vision blurred, chairs slipping free despite his effort to hold them back. Elena touched his arm once, a fleeting comfort, then stepped back. "He wanted you to keep living," she whispered. "That's how you honor him." When she left, Ethan sat for a long time with the lighter in his hands. The guilt didn't vanish. He doubted it ever would, but something shifted. Marco's sacrifice wasn't meant to chain him to despair. It was meant to push him forward, to keep the fire burning in a way only Ethan could now. For the first time since that night, Ethan felt the faintest flicker of light inside the darkness, and he closed his hand around the lighter as if holding on to Marco himself. The lighter became part of him. Ethan clipped it to his gear, tucked it into his jacket pocket, carried it like a talisman he dared not lose. It was small, almost ordinary, yet it held the weight of something sacred. Every time he brushed against it during a call, a steadying warmth flowed through him, as if Marco's hand still rested firmly on his shoulder, grounding him. The first morning he walked back into the firehouse after weeks of absence, silence met him. Not hostile, but heavy. His teammates watched him with quiet curiosity, their conversations dropping for a heartbeat before resuming in lowered tones. Ethan felt their eyes on him as he crossed the bay, the familiar scent of diesel and smoke wrapping around him like an old memory. He paused by Marco's locker, still untouched, helmet sitting proudly on top, and the air caught in his throat. For a moment, he almost turned around and left, but his hand brushed the lighter in his pocket, and he stayed. The call came 2 days later, as sudden as always, a house fire on the edge of the city, reports of people trapped inside. Ethan's heart pounded as he pulled on his mask, the old fear and guilt clawing at him. He thought of the warehouse, of Marco's last shove, of the fire swallowing everything. For a split second, his body screamed at him to step back, to let someone else go. Then his fingers closed over the lighter, and he heard Marco's voice in his head, clear as if he were right beside him. "Don't think. Act." Inside the burning house, the heat was suffocating, but Ethan moved with precision. He shouted directions, steadied his teammates, and pulled a young boy from beneath a collapsed beam. The child's coughs were weak, but alive. Carrying him out into the open air, Ethan felt the weight in his chest shift, not disappear, but loosen. Applause and cheers met him outside, neighbors crying with relief, but this time Ethan didn't shrink from it. He didn't feel like a fraud. He felt like a firefighter, doing his job, carrying Marco's courage with him. That night, back at the station, the team gathered around him. No one said it outright, but their nods, their claps on his back, their relieved grins spoke volumes. They had been waiting to see if Ethan would rise again, or let grief consume him. He had risen, and though he still felt Marco's absence like a shadow in the room, he also felt his friend's presence in every flame he faced down, in every life saved. Weeks turned into months. The pain never vanished, but it transformed. It stopped being a wound that bled and became a scar that reminded him why he fought, why he stayed. The lighter was always with him. Sometimes he lit it in the quiet of his apartment, just to watch the small flame dance. It was such a fragile thing, a flicker that could be snuffed out by the faintest breath, and yet it burned defiantly. It reminded him that Marco's sacrifice wasn't about ending a life. It was about preserving another's, about ensuring that Ethan carried the fire forward. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Ethan found himself walking toward the memorial wall at the firehouse. Marco's name had been added there, etched into stone with reverence. Flowers rested beneath it, fresh, left by someone earlier that day. Ethan stood in front of it for a long time, the sounds of the city humming faintly in the distance. Finally, he pulled the lighter from his pocket, thumb brushing over the engraved words. "For when the dark feels endless, light it." He whispered the phrase aloud, and for the first time, he didn't choke on the words. Instead, they felt like a promise. He clicked the lighter open, sparked the flame, and held it up toward the wall. The glow illuminated Marco's name, warm and golden against the cool stone. "I'm still here," Ethan murmured. "Still carrying you with me." The flame flickered once, then went out. Ethan closed the lighter, slipped it back into his pocket, and exhaled. The guilt was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't chains anymore, it was fuel. And as he turned back toward the firehouse, toward the brothers and sisters who trusted him, Toward the alarms that would inevitably call him again into danger, Ethan felt steady. Not because he was free of the past, but because he carried it, every ember of it, as a gift. Marco's gift.